In the early morning hours of October the 7th, as one of Israel's high holy days was coming to an end, on the eve of the 50th year celebration of the victory of the Yom Kippur War, when in 1973 an Arab coalition of nations jointly launched a surprise attack against Israel, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, which means a deluge or a tsunami, as thousands of Hamas operatives swarmed through and over a fence into southern Israel. The attacks began early in the morning, and it commenced with a barrage of over 3,000 rockets launched from Gaza in the south against Israel, as well as an invasion of vehicles and power paragliders. And as a result of this surprise attack and the horrific carnage that resulted, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Israel was at war. And since then, as we know, brothers and sisters, the Middle East has become inflamed as bombs and rockets have been launched from Israel back into Gaza, as Israel has capitulated by air and by land, infiltrating into Gaza itself. And the world has watched on nervously, and we've all been drawn into this conflict as rhetoric and discussions have turned into something much more serious. And rallies and protests around the world have escalated in number and in their violence. And as Christadelphians, brothers and sisters, we know what the end scene is going to be. It will involve all nations focused on the Middle East, as Yahweh draws all nations to Jerusalem to battle as Armageddon erupts. And these are the familiar words that we know from Zechariah chapter 14. Behold, the day of Yahweh cometh, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half the city shall go forth into captivity. And we know, brothers and sisters, from what we've seen of the footage, what that's all about. And the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall Yahweh go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst. We know there that the reference to his feet is a reference to the Lord Jesus Christ and his glorified saints, who, having come from the area of Sinai, arrive on the scene to challenge and to stop the nations of the world who have gathered against Jerusalem to battle. But we don't necessarily know the series of events that are going to lead up to that scene. We don't know the specific sequence, nor the timing or the delay in events to come, as the nations are caused to jostle into their respective positions for that scene that we've just read from Zechariah chapter 14. But we do know, brothers and sisters, that the Lord and the saints will ultimately come from the east to save mankind from obliteration, and I'm sure we each hope to be amongst that group in that day. There is no doubt that there is a changing undercurrent that is gaining momentum day by day. The swinging pendulum of public sentiment is violently swinging. And initially, Israel had a bit of support as many of the nations stood alongside Israel. But the tide is turning, brothers and sisters, exactly as Scripture requires it, and as we've read this evening in Jeremiah chapter 30. In verse 3, we read of them coming back into the land. For lo, the days come, saith Yahweh, that I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel and Judah, saith Yahweh. And I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. And in 1948, we didn't see, but we know about the miraculous establishment of Israel in the land against enormous odds, after 2,000 years of exile and persecution. And however here, Yahweh states, I will bring the captivity of my people. He goes on and he states, I will cause them to return to the land that I gave unto their fathers. And so history shows the fulfillment of such a prophecy. But their fortunes were going to change, as Jeremiah states from verse 4. And these are the words that Yahweh spake concerning Israel and concerning Judah. For thus saith Yahweh, we have heard a voice of trembling, of fear, and not of peace. Ask ye now and see whether a man doth travail with child. Wherefore do I see every man with his hands on his loins as a woman in travail, and all faces are turned into paleness. And over the course of the past few weeks, we've witnessed the distraught agony of individuals and families and communities in Israel. We've seen some of the devastation and the horrific pain inflicted as the evils of warfare are having their effects. Evil, monstrous crimes, human atrocities, extreme anguish, intense pain. And Jeremiah continues on in verse 7 and he says, Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. And there is obviously, brothers and sisters, more bloodshed and suffering to come. The prophet Jeremiah identified in the next few verses, verse 10 and 11, that this is ultimately the correction process that is necessary for the purging and the cleansing of the people of God. And more than likely, what we are seeing is so graphically witnessing is the commencement of that process of purifying and cleansing the people. As we look at the media information coming out of the Middle East at present, we're seeing Israel leaning on their own strength and power, flexing their military muscle against Hamas and Hezbollah and their supporters, of whom there are so many. And footage and news reports are being instantly transmitted around the world. Shocking scenes, distressing accounts, visual imagery that defies reasonable logic, exploited by both sides, making it very difficult, brothers and sisters, to know exactly in every incident what is the truth. And as Israel moving further and further into this war, they're losing many of their allies. And look what Yahweh stated through Jeremiah in verse 12. For thus saith Yahweh, Thy bruise is incurable, and thy wound is grievous. There is none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines. All thy lovers have forgotten thee. They seek thee not, for I have wounded thee with the wound of an enemy, with the chastisement of a cruel one, for the multitude of thine iniquity, because thy sins were increased. And initially, in the immediate aftermath of the 7th of October attack, sentiment, public opinion was definitely with Israel. What Israel experienced, the world witnessed. And the callous and the evil way in which it was carried out, it was repulsive, brothers and sisters. And the world in general felt extreme sympathy and pity for the Jewish people. But as a result of the subsequent brutal response of Israel, along with the influence of social media, as photos and footage, whether it was true or not, have been widely broadcast for all to see, it has resulted in the court of public opinion violently shifting. Freedom of speech and the right to protest has taken over the media like a storm. Supporting and rioting for the rights of the Palestinians, and what appears to be by many to be an overwhelming and an extensive capitulation by the Israelis. And there's protests and there's riots all about that. It appears as if in verse 12, Israel's bruise is incurable and their wound is grievous. Verse 13, there's none to plead thy cause. Thou hast no healing medicines. And the meteoric rise of anti-Semitism, hatred of the Jews, has erupted worldwide. The passion and the heated vitriol is inexplicable. Only a week ago, this is what this young Palestinian girl stated via her Instagram account. This Ahed Tamimi, Palestinian activist, said this week that Palestinians will slaughter the Jews of Judea and Samaria from Hebron to Jenin. Our message to the flocks of settlers: we're waiting for you, all in the cities of West Bank. From Hebron to Jenin, we will slaughter you. And you will say that what Hitler did to you is a joke, said Tamima in an Instagram post just on Sunday. We will drink your blood and eat your skull. Come on, we're waiting for you, she continued on. How did this young girl get to this point of such disgusting and revolting vitriol? And the reason why, brothers and sisters, is because there's an inbred hatred that is stimulated in the Palestinian children. And what is taking place today, brothers and sisters, in this war between the Israelis and the Palestinians is the rekindling in generation after generation of Jewish haters. Exactly as Jeremiah prophesied, Israel, your bruise is incurable. There's no answer, brothers and sisters, to such generational hatred that is being inbred generation after generation after generation. This girl, Ahed Tamimi, has a history. And here it is. In 2012, there was this curly-haired young blonde girl, 11 years of age, defiantly taunting the Israeli soldiers. A few years later, she became a member of the terrorist clan operating around Samaria. So she was fighting and she's assaulting and she's inciting violence against the Israeli soldiers. And this continued to intensify and escalate until finally she was arrested and she spent months in Israeli prison where she used the system to get a few degrees until she was finally released. And then what happened? Well, she became a celebrity. She co-authored a book about herself and was portrayed in the international media as a hero, the courageous young girl with blonde flowing hair representing the humanitarian cause of the Palestinians. She apparently became a celebrity. She was featured on CNN and the BBC, and she was in the Vogue and Glamour magazines. She was loved and she was championed by so many right around the world. But that's what has come out of her mouth and from her fingertips in the last few days, this inbred hatred for the Jews. Who can fix and heal that type of obsessive and fanatical situation and behaviour? That's just one fanatical young girl. But it's encouraged and it's driven by hateful leaders. Here's the rhetoric of one of Hamas's leaders. You need to try and keep up with the subtitles that are down the
video that really took everybody here by surprise. Hamas officials going on television vowing to strike Israel again and again with the end goal of wiping Israel off the map. This video shows a Hamas official being interviewed on Lebanese television. He claims everything Hamas has done is justified. This version with subtitles is being widely shared this afternoon online.
الدولة لا مقاولة على أرضنا، إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها، لأنه بالفعل هي تعتبر كارثة أمنية وعسكرية وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية، يجب أن تنتهي. لذلك احنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك، بكل قوة نصير لازم نقدمها، وحنقدمها مرتين وثلاثة، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة، لأنه احنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات.
It was going fast, but he said there will be this was not just the first attack, there will be a second attack, a third attack, and a fourth attack.
What we're seeing, brothers and sisters, and witnessing is going to increase and it's going to worsen. And Yahweh through Jeremiah stated in verse 12, "For thus saith Yahweh, Israel, thy bruise is incurable and thy wound is grievous. There is none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines. There's no man or there's no organisation nor any group of men, brothers and sisters, who can sort out and fix the Middle East scene that's developing today. It awaits the intervention of the Lord Jesus Christ. And as we watch on this developing scene, we need to recognise that that day is very fast approaching. This is what awaits the wicked in verse 23. Behold, the whirlwind of Yahweh goeth forth with fury, a continuing whirlwind. It shall fall with pain upon the head of the wicked. The fierce anger of Yahweh shall not return until he have done it, until he have performed the intents of his heart. In the latter days, you're going to consider it. And the developing scene in the Middle East is under Yahweh's direction. He has a plan and he's going to accomplish his purpose. And the reason Israel are suffering is because they're in unbelief. They've rejected Yahweh as their God. They no longer listen and they no longer follow his requirements. And in the terms of verse 14, it's as a result of the multitude of their iniquity and because their sins have increased. And again in verse 15, why criest thou for thine affliction? Thy sorrow is incurable for the multitude of thine iniquity. Because thy sins were increased, I've done these things unto you. So the solution and the answer for Israel will only be by Yahweh's intervention. So I'm sure, brothers and sisters, that we all know pretty well the biblical history of God's people, the Jews. And in this second portion of our night, we want to consider the more recent historical background to the situation that has developed into what we're seeing intensifying in the Middle East. We've briefly touched on the hatred between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and we want to see what the elements are that are impacting this today. And we'll have a look at this by utilising a few video clips that hopefully will assist us. But firstly, let's remind ourselves of how Jeremiah prophesied of this developing hatred in this chapter that we read this evening, because he prophesied of the ostracising of the Jewish people and their cause. And of particular note are his comments in verse 12 to 14, which we've read, but I'd like to read them again. For thus saith Yahweh, thy bruise is incurable, thy wound is grievous. There's none to plead thy cause, that thou mayest be bound up. Thou hast no healing medicines. All thy lovers have forgotten thee. They seek thee not. For I have wounded thee with the wound of an enemy, with the chastisement of a cruel one, for the multitude of thine iniquity, because thy sins were increased. The Amplified Bible renders the word lovers there as allies. And so the Net Bible, the New English translation, has all your allies have abandoned you. They no longer have any concern for you. And already we can see through the media the gathering sympathisers to the cause of the Palestinians. The resistance by nations worldwide against Israel defending themselves as a result of the attack by Hamas. And here on the screen, there's just a few scenes in other countries, people that are not necessarily related to the Jews at all, or to the Palestinians or to the Arabs, as people put pressure on their own governments to distance themselves or even to come out and boldly condemn the Jewish people. The difficulty for Israel is that if they don't get rid of Hamas, if Israel leave a few pockets of resistance, cells of terrorists, then they will expect increasing terrorist activities to an even greater degree than what they're seeing today. And as that Hamas leader stated, it'll be October the 7th, over and over and over again. Just look at the situation of the Palestinians, because here's a video that identifies just a physical problem.
If you look at Gaza, an area roughly half the size of Canberra, it's divided into 5 local areas: North Gaza, Gaza City, Deir al-Balah, Khan Yunis and Rafah in the south. The blue line in the middle is a series of wetlands, a geological line which Israel says divides the territory into north and south. More than 1.2 million people live north of this line. On Friday, they were told they must leave their homes before Israel's army moves in. Gaza is a narrow strip of land hugging the Mediterranean coast, 41 kilometres long, and at its widest, 13 kilometres on the border with Egypt in the south.
So the area of Gaza is only very small, but it's packed with Palestinians. Over 2 million people exist in this slither of land, and they're all fenced in. From their perspective, they were displaced from their homes back in 1947 and so on, when they were living right throughout the land of Israel, which was then called Palestine. Hence, they're called Palestinians. And so now they're in that area and they're oppressed. From their perspective, they're oppressed, they're disgruntled, and they're absolutely angry. And so there's this increasing festering of hatred for the Jews, who the Palestinians blame for their plight. And the situation's only going to get worse, brothers and sisters, as each day goes by of this war and the next generation of Jewish haters is born. So just think of the circumstances and the difficulties, brothers and sisters. Just 41 kilometres and 13 kilometres at its widest point. And the whole population of the state of South Australia forced into that area. So all the people of Port Lincoln and of Whyalla and Port Pirie, the Riverland, Mount Gambier, Gawler, Murray Bridge and so on, everyone in South Australia, the shops, the businesses, the schools, the hospitals, the parklands, and accommodated them all between Glenelg and Smithfield, and a maximum of 13 kilometres wide. So that's from Glenelg straight up to Smithfield, Humbug Scrub Road across there, down past Golden Grove, Modbury, including Campbelltown, going down to Burnside and arriving at Blackwood. That's the area, brothers and sisters, and the whole of South Australia, the whole population of South Australia packed into that area. The main issue that bubbles away is the right to the rest of the land of Israel, once called, prior to 1947, Palestine. And this is the contentious point, as the Palestinians claim that they can trace their history back before the Jews were given the land in 1948. So going back prior to that. Over a decade ago, Brother Roger Lewis spoke about the history of the Palestinians. We're going to listen to a little section of that talk as he outlines the origin of the Palestinians. Take particular note of his comments towards the end. It's not going to go very long because I've also put them on the screen. Now, I've adjusted his comments a bit because he uses a word which really shouldn't be used in the English language at all, but he unfortunately does use it a couple of times. But just listen mainly to what his comments are about.
Palestine and Palestinians. Well, it's a biblical term actually, because the word Palestinian comes from the word Palestina that's found in the Bible. It's the Hebrew word Pelasheth. That word Pelasheth, meaning rolling or migratory, hence the land of the wanderers, is translated as Palestina 3 times, as Palestine once, as Philistia 3 times, and as Philistines once. But it's the word translated Palestina, it's where the word Palestine comes from, and where the word Palestinian is derived from. So there is a biblical basis to this particular word. So I guess what we would say is that from a scriptural perspective, therefore, a Palestinian is a Philistine, and a Philistine is a Palestinian, because certainly they control the same territory, the Palestinians compared to the Philistines of old. They manifest the same attributes, so they qualify on both counts, and they're going to receive or share the same end from a biblical perspective. In fact, interestingly enough, the Arabic for the term Palestine liberation is Tahrir Philistine. So you can see that interplay between the word Philistine, Philistine, and Palestine, Palestinian. It's all one word in the Hebrew. So there's a biblical background to that particular word. Now, I should really cover my position at the outset, in case you think I'm heading off in the wrong direction biblically, and just say this. Modern Palestinians are not in any way descended from the actual Philistines of Old Testament times. There's no actual connection with the Philistines. There's no ethnic or linguistic or cultural connection whatsoever. The Philistines are gone, brothers and sisters. They were exterminated off the face of the earth, as we shall see in a set of prophecies that we're going to look at later on. In fact, I'd have to say that the whole story of the Palestinian people today is the most amazing media fraud perpetrated by the Palestinian people themselves.
A media fraud. And that's what we hear being perpetrated in the media today, particularly from the Arabs. When it comes to the ownership of the land, we know from the Bible that Israel, the Jews, have a history in the land, and it dates back thousands of years. We also know that there are archaeological discoveries proving their existence in the land by their ancient fathers. So items dating back to the times of Hezekiah's pool, there's articles, there's coins, there's pottery, all proving their existence in the land, called at one time Palestine, but today called Israel. They were in the land thousands of years ago, the Jews. It's definitely the homeland of the Jews, promised to them, and today they're in the land. The people that today identify themselves as Palestinians are descendants of mixed nomadic people. Some of them were Arabs, some of them were Jews that were in the land. They're Christian refugees who moved into the land as agriculturalists and as farmers during the Ottoman rule way back hundreds of years ago, and British rule in more recent times. They were geographically in the land. But they are the people and the families and the communities who were displaced from their homes when the United Nations determined that the Jews were to be given back their ancient homeland, Palestine, or today Israel. We're going to play the next video clip that deals a little bit more with this and the associated problems. And it's perhaps going to emphasize for us that the culture of the Arab Muslim people, with all their different factions, Hamas, Hezbollah and whatever, they tend to be quite difficult people to deal with. And you get that when you listen to the news. Those who are today called Palestinians as a people, they seem to be disagreeable, argumentative, difficult to manage. And that's the point that comes out of this video. But also, I think over the past few weeks, we've probably seen evidence of footage showing that between themselves, the people themselves are very poorly organised, but even more particularly in the behaviour of Hamas.
If Israel just allowed the Palestinians to have a state of their own, there would be peace in the Middle East, right? That's what you hear from UN ambassadors, European diplomats, and most college professors. But what if I told you that Israel has already offered the Palestinians a state of their own? And not just once, but on 5 separate occasions. Don't believe me? Let's review the record. After the breakup of the Ottoman Empire following World War I, Britain took control of most of the Middle East, including the area that constitutes modern Israel. 17 years later, in 1936, the Arabs rebelled against the British and against their Jewish neighbors. The British formed a task force, the Peel Commission, to study the cause of the rebellion. The commission concluded that the reason for the violence was that 2 peoples, Jews and Arabs, wanted to govern the same land. The answer, the Peel Commission concluded, would be to create 2 independent states, one for the Jews and one for the Arabs, a 2-state solution. The suggested split was heavily in favor of the Arabs. The British offered them 80% of the disputed territory, the Jews the remaining 20%. Yet, despite the tiny size of their proposed state, the Jews voted to accept this offer, but the Arabs rejected it and resumed their violent rebellion. Rejection number 1. 10 years later, in 1947, the British asked the United Nations to find a new solution to the continuing tensions. Like the Peel Commission, the UN decided that the best way to resolve the conflict was to divide the land. In November 1947, The UN voted to create two states. Again, the Jews accepted the offer, and again, the Arabs rejected it. Only this time, they did so by launching an all-out war. Rejection number 2. Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria joined the conflict, but they failed. Israel won the war and got on with the business of building a new nation. Most of the land set aside by the UN for an Arab state, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, became occupied territory, occupied not by Israel, but by Jordan. 20 years later, in 1967, the Arabs, led this time by Egypt and joined by Syria and Jordan, once again sought to destroy the Jewish state. The 1967 conflict, known as the Six-Day War, ended in a stunning victory for Israel. Jerusalem and the West Bank, as well as the area known as the Gaza Strip, fell into Israel's hands. The government split over what to do with this new territory. Half wanted to return the West Bank to Jordan and Gaza to Egypt in exchange for peace. The other half wanted to give it to the region's Arabs, who had begun referring to themselves as the Palestinians, in the hope that they would ultimately build their own state there. Neither initiative got very far. A few months later, the Arab League met in Sudan and issued its infamous 3 no's. No peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel. Again, a 2-state solution was dismissed by the Arabs, making this rejection number 3. In 2000, Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak met at Camp David with Palestinian Liberation Organization Chairman Yasser Arafat to conclude a new 2-state plan. Barak offered Arafat a Palestinian state in all of Gaza and 94% of the West Bank, with East Jerusalem as its capital. But the Palestinian leader rejected the offer. In the words of US President Bill Clinton, Arafat was here 14 days and said no to everything. Instead, the Palestinians launched a bloody wave of suicide bombings that killed over 1,000 Israelis and maimed thousands more on buses, in wedding halls, and in pizza parlors. Rejection number 4. In 2008, Israel tried yet again. Prime Minister Ehud Olmert went even further than Ehud Barak had, expanding the peace offer to include additional land to sweeten the deal. Like his predecessor, the new Palestinian leader, Mahmoud Abbas, turned the deal down. Rejection number 5. In between these last 2 Israeli offers, Israel unilaterally left Gaza, giving the Palestinians complete control there. Instead of developing this territory for the good of its citizens, the Palestinians turned Gaza into a terrorist base from which they have fired thousands of rockets into Israel. Each time Israel has agreed to a Palestinian state, the Palestinians have rejected the offer, often violently. So if you're interested in peace in the Middle East, maybe the answer is not to pressure Israel to make yet another offer of a state to the Palestinians. Maybe the answer is to pressure the Palestinians to finally accept the existence of a Jewish state.
There's a bit of history, brothers and sisters, that shows how deep the wounds of this whole conflict go. And hopefully that provides a bit of an insight into what we're seeing take place today. As well as that, in 2006, the Palestinians held an election. 2006, that was the last election in Gaza, so it's 15 years ago between elections at least. And Hamas assumed the government control of Gaza. So they've held the seat of power ever since. And that's why in this present war, Israel continue to point out that information coming out of the area of Gaza is controlled by Hamas, and therefore it isn't at all reliable. And as the video mentioned, Hamas has been using funding that has been provided to them, not for developing the area for the goods of the citizens, but instead it turned Gaza into a terrorist haven. So Israel, brothers and sisters, are surrounded by enemies.
In a nutshell, it's this. One side wants the other side dead. Israel wants to exist as a Jewish state and to live in peace. Israel also recognizes the right of Palestinians to have their own state and to live in peace. The problem, however, is that most Palestinians and many other Muslims and Arabs do not recognize the right of the Jewish state of Israel to exist. This has been true since 1947, when the United Nations voted to divide the land called Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews accepted the United Nations partition, but no Arab or any other Muslim country accepted it. When British rule ended on May 15, 1948, the armies of all the neighboring Arab states, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Transjordan, and Egypt, attacked the one-day-old state of Israel in order to destroy it. But to the world's surprise, the little Jewish state survived. Then it happened again. In 1967, the dictator of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, announced his plan, in his words, to destroy Israel. He placed Egyptian troops on Israel's border, and armies of surrounding Arab countries were also mobilized to attack. However, Israel preemptively attacked Egypt and Syria. Israel did not attack Jordan and begged Jordan's king not to join the war. But he did. And only because of that did Israel take control of Jordanian land, specifically the West Bank of the Jordan River. Shortly after the war, the Arab states went to Khartoum, Sudan, and announced their famous 3 no's: no recognition, no peace, and no negotiations. What was Israel supposed to do? Well, one thing Israel did a little more than a decade later in 1978 was to give the entire Sinai Peninsula, an area of land bigger than Israel itself and with oil, back to Egypt, because Egypt, under new leadership, signed a peace agreement with Israel. So Israel gave land for the promise of peace with Egypt, and it has always been willing to do the same thing with the Palestinians. All the Palestinians have ever had to do is recognize Israel as a Jewish state and promise to live in peace with it. But when Israel has proposed trading land for peace, as it did in 2000, when it agreed to give the Palestinians a sovereign state in more than 95% of the West Bank and all of Gaza, the Palestinian leadership rejected the offer and instead responded by sending waves of suicide terrorists into Israel. Meanwhile, Palestinian radio, television, and school curricula remain filled with glorification of terrorists, demonization of Jews, and the daily repeated message that Israel should cease to exist. So it's not hard to explain the Middle East dispute. One side wants the other dead. The motto of Hamas, the Palestinian rulers of Gaza, is, "We love death as much as the Jews love life." There are 22 Arab states in the world, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean. There is one Jewish state in the world, and it is about the size of New Jersey. In fact, tiny El Salvador is larger than Israel. Finally, think about these 2 questions. If tomorrow Israel laid down its arms and announced, "We will fight no more," what would happen? And if the Arab countries around Israel laid down their arms and announced, "We will fight no more," what would happen? In the first case, there would be an immediate destruction of the state of Israel and mass murder of its Jewish population. In the second case, there would be peace the next day. As I said at the outset, it is a simple problem to describe. One side wants the other dead. And if it didn't, there would be peace. Please remember this. There has never been a state in the geographic area known as Palestine that was not Jewish. Israel is the 3rd Jewish state to exist in that area. There was never an Arab state, never a Palestinian state, never a Muslim or any other state. That's the issue. Why can't the one Jewish state the size of El Salvador be allowed to exist? That is the Middle East problem.
Thy bruise is incurable, and thy wound is grievous. We know from Bible prophecy, brothers and sisters, that Yahweh has determined that Israel are back in their land to stay. And although other nations may struggle to accept that, although, as Jeremiah stated in the chapter we've read, there's going to be a lot of suffering and anguish that still lies ahead, everything is following Yahweh's will and purpose. The Arab nations in the past, they joined forces in an endeavour to drive the Jews into the sea. And we're seeing that repeated now. And so as this situation in the Middle East continues to flare up, and as we see and we hear of the horrific tragedies and the phrase from the river to the sea, we hear that phrase mentioned, we need to recognise and remember that this is a call to exterminate the Jewish people from the land. And it should remind us, brothers and sisters, that the time of Jacob's trouble is not over. It's just increasing and it's worsening. The psalmist wrote in Psalm 83, "Keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They've taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they've consulted together with one consent, they confederate against thee." So hopefully, brothers and sisters, this evening we've seen that we are witnessing day by day the fulfilling of Bible prophecy. Very difficult times lie ahead for Israel, and difficult times lie ahead for the world. How blessed we are, as Brother Josh said in his comments, that we have the answers, that we have a wonderful and a comforting hope that we can rest on. And so in this escalating conflict, we need to be aware of emotionally taking sides. There is confronting information and imagery that can pull on our emotions. Israel are God's people. They are the seed of Abraham. And they are God's witnesses that he exists and that he's in control. But they're in unbelief and they're trusting in their own strength. So there's still a lot of destruction. There's a lot of sad stories of human atrocities taking place. Humanitarian ceasefires are not going to be the answer. As that video clip said, if Israel stop, if they don't get rid of these surrounding areas of terrorist activity, these groups that have so much hatred against Israel, they'll just be massacred. October the 7th, over and over and over again. The only answer, brothers and sisters, the only answer is the return and the intervention of our Lord Jesus Christ. And if that is the case, we each need to be ready. So let's encourage and let's strengthen each other as we patiently await our Lord's return.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching, and remember to come back soon.